Well, we left off from the last video talking about the ability to maybe give a industry a score based upon their market structure. And there are two ways of measuring a firm's market structure. One is called the concentration ratio, which is simplistic. And we're going to be going over a more thorough way of measuring market power in a moment. Now, the concentration ratio is very, very simple. It's a measure of the market power that relates to the largest firms in the market. Now, what do we mean by largest firms? Well, usually it's the four largest firms. So let's say you have, I don't know, a group of CEOs in a meeting. Let's say there are 8 CEOs or 8 companies in an industry, and you ask them to line up. So CEO here, CEO here. Now there are 8 people in line, right? So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here's 8. Now, in what order did they line up? Well, I'm asking them to line up in order of market share. So in other words, the first person in line is the CEO with the largest market share. The second person in line is the CEO with the second largest market share. What the concentration ratio does, it just looks at the top 4 firms. It looks at their market share and adds them up, and you get a score. And so let's look at the, in your textbook, there's a table that lists firms or industries and measures their concentration ratio by adding up the 4 largest firms' market share. So you can see here, this product is another way of saying the industry. So you can see these are all classifications of industry. And the industry ranges from broadly defined to narrowly defined. So you can see the very first one, video games. Well, there are only 3 firms in the video game console industry: Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. And of course, if there's only 3, that means if you add up their market shares, they're going to equal 100%. Well, let's look at way down here, beer. Beer, again, that's a broadly defined market, and the 4 big producers of beer are Anheuser-Busch, Philip Morris, Pabst, and I guess Yuengling. And those 4 firms combined give you an 85% market share. Now, there's still a remaining 15% unaccounted for. And in the United States, that remaining 15% is fought over by hundreds, maybe even thousands of small breweries, microbrewed beer, craft brewed beer, right? So you could see that beer, there could be hundreds of competitors. In video game consoles, there are only 3, but both are considered to be oligopolistic. So let me give you an example here. Let's say, okay, again, let's talk about beer. The Anheuser-Busch by themselves has roughly 50% market share. So it has a concentration ratio greater than 70%. And that's usually the kind of the benchmark for being categorized as an oligopoly. If you have a concentration ratio of 70% or greater, your industry is in oligopolistic territory. So I would place the beer industry somewhere right about there. They're broadly defined. I'd place their industry there, and that gives you, it's roughly an 85% concentration ratio. Now China is the world's biggest market for beer, right? It's far bigger than the United States, which is number 2, and Germany, which is number 3. So you can see the size of the circle right here shows you the size of the market in terms of hectoliters. And China has the biggest one right here, bigger than the United States right there. And Germany is about number 3 right there. Now, does China have the same market structure concentration ratio as the United States? Well, their industry, I wouldn't say it's oligopolistic because the Chinese market is highly fragmented. China Resource Enterprise, the brewer of a beer called Snow, that's China's most popular beer. And China Resource Enterprise has about 21.7, roughly 22% market share. That's the biggest one. So I'd place China's market structure, their industry, right about there, closer to perfect competition than the US beer market. So I wouldn't say they're oligopolistic. Now I like this graphic. This is showing the soft drink industry. See, soft drink industry. And the size of these circles, you can see here, is the relative market share. So you can see Coca-Cola has 43% market share, followed by Pepsi. Then Dr. Pepper Snapple Group, that's roughly 15%. Now, all of these little circles you see here, these little teeny circles, those are products that each company makes in this broadly defined industry. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's go to Coca-Cola. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more right about there. Zoom. Boom. So you can see here's Coca-Cola, and there are a number of subcategories of Coca-Cola: cherry Coke, lime Coke, Diet Coke, Mexican Coca-Cola. And you could see that even though this is an oligopolistic industry with 3 large firms, there's still a lot of competition, even within an firm. For example, Mr. Pibb, you may not be familiar with that. That kind of tastes like Dr. Pepper. And cherry Coke is also another soft drink that sort of tastes like Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper is not made by Coca-Cola. So you can see these two compete against Dr. Pepper, which is somewhere over here, Dr. Pepper. But they also compete against each other. So there's a lot of competition between firms and actually within a firm's product line. Now, keep in mind, concentration ratio is a very crude measure of market power because market power isn't always associated with the size of the firm. Some firms could have a lot of power in local markets. I mean, take into account daily newspapers. Nationally, I think the 3 largest newspapers would be New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and maybe Washington Post. But if you look at the San Francisco Bay Area, the San Francisco Chronicle is the dominant paper in the Bay Area. They have a very small market share nationally, but a very large market share locally or regionally. So concentration ratio, national concentration ratio, does not really help you understand local market power. And smaller firms could get market power if they acted together. Now, in some cases, coordinating your actions among firms could be illegal because that could be considered to be anti-competitive. Now, here's the second way of measuring market power, the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. It's usually referred to as HHI. And this is superior to the concentration ratio because this not only takes into account market share, but it also takes into account every single firm in an industry, not just the 4 largest. So basically, what you do is you take the market share of each firm, you square it, and then you sum it up. So that's the sum of the squares. It kind of looks like this. Again, you take the market share of a firm, you square it, and this is the symbol for summation. You sum all of the firms in the industry. So let me give you an example. Let's say we have 5 firms in this industry. You have a 30% market share, 30%, 20%, 10%, and 10%. Now, the first thing you do is, keep in mind 30%, that's 0.3, right? the first rule in calculating the HHI is convert this 30% into a whole number. So this is going to go from 30.30 to 30. In this case, it's going to be 0.20. We're going to convert that to 20. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this, square it. Take this, square it, this, square it, square it, and square it, and add them up. So when you do that, you get a score of 2,400. Now, what you got to do is you got to interpret that score. Now, keep in mind, the HHI has a maximum score because if you have a monopoly, the monopoly has a market. The monopolist has a 100% market share. So if you take 100 squared, that equals 10,000. So 10,000 is the maximum score for the HHI. So any industry that's not a monopoly has some score less than 10,000. In this particular case, this oligopolistic industry has a score of 2,400. Now, the Department of Justice has an interest in measuring market share, or HHI, or market structure, because if you want to merge or buy a rival, you've got to get permission from the government, in particular the Justice Department. And what they say is they feel that any industry that has a score between 1,500 and 1,800 is considered to be moderately concentrated. Anything above 1,800, they consider to be excessively concentrated. And so what they say, now this word transactions, think of mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions of firms that increase the industry by more than 200 points or put you over 1,800, they're going to say, no, you can't merge because that will reduce the level of competition to too great of a degree. So what we're going to do is next video is we're going to talk about how oligopolists behave given their unique market structure.